All I can say is I ought to retire now. I don't know, somehow you've reached nirvana in Baba's world when Darwin Shaw introduces you. Wonderful. Thank you, Darwin. Boy. Darwin often was asked to speak for Baba, so in addition to all that I associate with hearing Darwin's voice, I also associate Baba's words, because in 62, for example, Darwin would read out Baba's words for us. He's also kind of the designated spokesman. When we went in 69, somebody had to represent all the crazies who were going to India, and so to put our best foot forward, Darwin was asked, to speak to any of the people who came. But poor Darwin, all the other Baba lovers were milling around as the reporter was there, so he had to. What could he do? He couldn't protect it. The cat was out of the bag. All these people were talking about all their things, but it turned out really beautifully, and that article came out of that in the New Yorker, that J. Baba article, yeah. But I associate Darwin with speaking for us, and I can't believe, really either, thinking back to 1958, I can't believe that I'm able now to get up in front of people and say Baba's name. Someday perhaps I'll be able to do it as beautifully as Darwin Shaw, but thank you, Darwin. I wanted to begin with something from Baba before we just talk about whatever you like to talk about. Baba, in 1962, the rain came one day unexpectedly in November. It doesn't rain, supposedly, in Pune, but it did come, as you've read, and we were all drenched, soaked to the bone, and we had all our finery on too, and we looked all sort of like bedraggled wet hens sitting there. And I was very peculiar about dressing in 62, because my idea was I was going to look my best for Baba, and the only thing that I had that I thought was my best at 13 years old was this little gold coat with those little emblems on it that the kids used to wear. And the only problem with that little gold coat was that it was wool. But the funny thing is, I didn't mind. I just was so happy that I was dressed right that it didn't bother me that it was a wool coat in India. But the rain sort of took its toll on all of our finery, my wool coat included. And Baba, of course, teased us unmercifully about it after it happened, and the next day it rained, and all that, and you better be careful today. Are you prepared? It might rain again. Of course, we all were prepared after that, and it never rained again. But anyway, at that time, he said, he quoted Hafiz, and first he said, no matter how it rains or blows, he said, stick to your posts. And he quoted Hafiz. Hafiz says, be firm as a rock in the midst of the storm of love, or it might turn you topsy-turvy. And then Baba added, he said, that was nothing yesterday, only a shower. So I wanted to begin with that, and also with this quote that he said, which is to do with remaining at your post and firm. He said, a post to stand erect and firm must have its butt end sunk well into the ground. I like that image, don't you? Likewise, my lover needs to have the base of his faith deeply embedded in my divinity if he would remain steadfast in my love. I feel that that's what this weekend has helped me to renew, is that deep conviction in Baba's divinity, that sharing with you reminds me of just how divine he is. and how many things that he does every day of our lives that are reminders of that divinity. And hearing the stories of all of you today, I heard so many beautiful things from people about their lives, about the commitments they've made to Baba, about all the small but yet great things that Baba does in your lives and our lives. And I can only say that I'm sure that I'm going to leave this place Wednesday with my butt in much firmer in the ground of his divinity. And well, tonight is a time to tell stories or to talk about things or to listen to children or to whatever it is that we want to do. So, why don't I let you say to me what you think we should talk about or share to open up. Yeah.
Well, even though you have told some of these stories about how these various times you were with Baba, it's been several years, so I, for one, would certainly be happy hearing any or all of those again.
Where's my watch? No, that's very sweet. Of course, that's the loveliest thing to ask a person is to share time with Baba, because reliving that is very precious. But and I will. The reason that the two talks I've given so far really have only mention of time with Baba is because I've been working pretty hard the last few years to try to focus more deeply on Baba, to figure out where my relationship is with Baba. And my life with Baba is, I just need to share and talk about where I am in my life with Baba, because that for me helps me to grow and to be aware of where I need to work some more with him. And so you've given me that opportunity. I mean, I don't know if you realize that, so maybe it's good to say it, that you've given me tremendous opportunity to grow myself in Baba by preparing the thoughts that I've shared with you so far this weekend. And also, many of us in the room are of a similar age and development, and many things we share. And so I feel somehow Baba wants me to speak about those things, so that we can all know that we're going through similar things. So that's why I guess I've emphasized my life with Baba now. But the stories of being with Baba as a child are also not just memories. They are living experiences of Baba. They are our story. I don't know how you feel, but when I hear, for example, Darwin talk about his times with Baba, I feel it's also our story. And it isn't a memory or a historical event. It's Baba giving darshan again. And that's why he had some people have these experiences, so that they could relive them. And by reliving them, everyone could have them. Baba could again be there, as he is right now. One beautiful story that I've told before, but some may not have heard, that comes to mind when you ask about stories of being with Baba. This comes to mind because it's one of the most important moments that I had with him. And that was in 1958, when Baba was going to leave the center just for a brief time. It's the only time, I think, that he actually left the center during his 1958 visit, to go and see the films taken at his 1956 visit. And that was going to be in my mother's theater, which was near the center. So it was a short distance away. And my station, when I was on the center, would be sort of near the car when he'd come out of the lagoon cabin, because I figured if I were near the car I could hold the door and maybe he would see me or touch me or, you know, something. And so I would, exactly. Exactly. I don't know what he had under that pink coat, but it could have been, you never know. That's about how old I was. I don't know whether that's what I did, but that's how old I was. And we planned all these sound effects. So I would stand by the door, and Baba came out of the lagoon cabin to go, and Elizabeth was driving, as usual. And I held the door, and Baba got in the car, the Ford that he drove around in '58. And he looked at me, and I must have had this terribly serious, forlorn expression on my face, as though I were a lost child. And I mean, I'm a fairly serious person anyway, so, you know, I just must have looked particularly forlorn. And Baba said, "Come on, you can go with me, come on." This, of course, that's more than my heart's desire. And then Baba moved over in the seat of the car so I could come and sit next to him. And it was only a long time later that I realized that must have been painful for Baba, because, you know, his hip was quite bad in '58, and he was carried, he couldn't walk freely. And this was one of those cars that had the hump in the middle, you know, those old things. And so the person who sat in the middle, of course, had to go up like this. And so Baba moved into the middle and scrunched himself up there on that thing so I could sit next to him like that. And of course, if I had been older and known, you see, but Baba was so sweet to children, and so I didn't know until years later just what that meant. But anyway, I sat next to him, and Kitty was in the back seat. Another little boy, Chip, who was sort of standing there with me. Baba let him ride also in the car, and must have been Erich in the back seat. To tell you the truth, the mandali, I didn't know until after Baba dropped his physical body, really speaking, because all attention was on Baba for me, and they were just there in the woodwork. Anyway, we drove along, and Kitty got it into her head to ask a question. And you know how Kitty is. It's just, if it comes to her, it comes out. It sort of pops out, you know. And we were going along the highway towards the theater, and Kitty somehow gets it into her head to say, "Oh, Baba, what about Jane and Charles?" Meaning my mother and father. Shouldn't they try to come back together? See, they had separated about a year earlier. And Baba turned so that he could see his gesture, but that he was looking at me, and he went like this. And then Kitty didn't let that lie. She said, "Well, Baba, what about the children? Don't the children, Jane be alone raising 3 children, don't they need a father in the house? Doesn't she need help, a father?" So Baba turned, and he looked so that she could see him again. But then he looked right at me, and he Baba's smile, he smiled that beautiful smile. When Baba smiled, it just, his whole face lit up. And he smiled at me, and then he said, "I am their father." And from that moment on, see, I knew that he would be that. And we think of Baba's father and mother and friend. But sometimes it's easy to sort of forget that he is actually that he takes those roles in our lives. That, well, for example, when I graduated from high school, I sent him the invitation that would have gone to my father. You know, they give you one for your father and your mother and everything. Sent it to Baba. I didn't think about it really as being odd or strange that I was inviting the avatar of the age to my high school graduation. Now perhaps it sounds a bit odd, but but it was very natural because that's the way he made me feel. He was so sweet, you know. He made me feel that even though he was thousands of miles away, and but he never let me forget, you know. And so he sent back a message saying, he said, "I'm happy with your graduation from high school. Mm-hmm. But," he said, "I'm happier still with your aim to graduate in the love of the highest of the high." You know? So, you know, that was a nice graduation present. And also, you know, I had a close friend when I was a child, like many children. I had a friend who was a dog. I don't think either of us knew she was a dog, but I now realize she was definitely a dog. From the pictures, you know. But while she was alive, she was definitely just a very real person, and she came to live with me and take over most of the bed, I must say, after Baba left the center, just after Baba left the center. And her name was Buff. She was a collie dog. And Baba always, not one time, not two times, he always sent love to Buff in every message we ever got. And then when we got Puff the cat, also to Puff. And the turtle Jimmy, also to him. And really, they have as many messages from Baba as we do. And when Buff, she got ill, she got very ill. And so Elizabeth, whose love for animals is legend, of course, and that's a whole nother subject, but she told me about her illness and took me to see her for the last time. And she added on the cable to Baba, after receiving the family letter, she added on a cable in response to that. She was allowed to cable back about that dog Buff was sick. And Baba cabled back and to me. And actually, it's very rare in my life that I got direct cable from Baba because he was in seclusion most of the time I knew him. And only for real important work or emergencies was there communication. But he cabled back and he said, "Your love for me will help Buff, who is also mine." And he said, "Be resigned and happy to my will." Meher Baba. And it is just, I tell you that because I can't imagine how sweet Baba. I mean, only when we look at our lives now, and some of you told me today of your things in your lives, we just should meditate every evening on the beautiful, sweet things Baba has done for us that day. Because he's doing it all the time. And this is just an example of that, how touching. You know, when Phyllis was talking earlier today about life after death, I thought of my dear sweet dog, you know, Baba taking all that trouble for her. Anyway, he said, "I am your father." And that he lived out. He lived it. He took the job, and he took it seriously. He's been a very good father. And you see, that's important, because it's not that somehow he's some great cosmic force, and you sort of imagine then that he helps you and so forth. It's the other way. He does his job in your life in every small way, and that leads to these big things, avatar and so forth. For me, you know, because human beings, for us, it's the little things. It's the small things. And Baba was so attentive to every detail. Well, we arrived at the theater, and Wendy told you a couple of years ago about that, I'm sure, her meeting of Baba, because that's when she met Baba. She was standing there in a little white and purple dress, and Mother was also in one. They were twins, you know, same dress, and they were standing there. And I was sitting with Baba so I could see his face as he saw Wendy, and he was so delighted when he saw Wendy. You know, who wouldn't be? And he knew, of course, how special Wendy is. And he said, Baba, he said he looked, you know, the dresses, he noticed right away. He was so happy, you know. He was anxious to meet her. So that was the first thing, was when we arrived, was that she met him. And then we went in all together into the theater, and Baba sat in his seat that had been prepared for him. And Wendy and I rushed forward and to sit as near as we could, and the only places we could find were in front of Baba on either side of his feet. And he had his sandals off and his feet were just there. And it was so beautiful to sit next to his feet. That's mostly what I watched for the time, because I had never really seen his feet before, noticed or anything. And there I was sitting next to them. Since I was kind of small, I was very close to them. Mother objected to this because she she thought we were blocking Baba's view. So she sort of, you know how mothers try to signal to move, you know. And there's some inner antenna that kids have. They know their mother is doing this, so they ignore it completely. Yeah? And so she got a little more frantic, you know, like this. And finally, Baba turned to her and said, "It's all right, let him stay." And the film started, and Baba, I was very conscious of not moving so as to disturb Baba. I wanted to stay very, very still, so that I wouldn't disturb his view of the film. And I tried very, very hard just to not move at all. And sort of in the middle, I got this terrible urge to cough. You know how that is. You get this tickly feeling, and you just know there's nothing you can do. You know, you're going to cough. And I was getting more and more anxious about it. You know, and I was thinking, what can I do to stop this feeling? You know, and it was coming on strong. You know, and as I was absorbed in that, I suddenly, Baba reached out and pats me on the back like this, and I look back at Baba, and he goes, "Cough." Baba says, "Go ahead." So I coughed up a storm and got it all out. And it wasn't until, of course, it's not till years later that one realizes who this is that you're dealing with here, but at the time it seemed so natural. The hardest part for me about expressing Baba's divinity is that everything about him was so natural and so human and so real that just divinity is redefined. It means that which is most human. So all of those unbelievable things about him, that he really knew your heart at every moment, seemed natural. It seemed so human and natural when you're around him. So it's kind of hard to say what that means in terms of being divine. But years later, of course, when the picture is painted, it's of a divinely human person. And it's hard to imagine the world will ever see someone like that. I mean, every time he comes, I think people feel that way. How can the world contain such a wonderful human being, such a complete human being? Well, so many things happened during that visit that it is indeed endless, and so many things happened in '62, but let me pause here for a moment and see if there are other things people want to talk about. Yeah.
Several years ago when I was at the center, I remember some people went off the center, and that might have been the very first time I met you. I don't know if anybody prompted you with a question, or if you posed the question and had the answer at hand, but you talked about one word that you felt best described Baba from your experience of him. I wonder if you still have the same answer as you had those several years ago.
Oh my.
But it'll be new to others.
I'm not sure I do.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember it?
Oh, yeah.
You're going to give me a hint? Is it bigger than a bread box? Huh?
I won't tell anybody if you don't want to answer it.
No.
Right now.
No, tell me. I'm interested.
Okay. It was grace.
Grace. Yeah. That's a pretty good answer. I'm glad you remembered it. Grace. Absolutely. Baba was the most graceful human being I've ever seen. There's no doubt about it. He was all grace. He was never awkward or self-conscious. He was so he's so confident in everything that he did and every movement he made. Really, I've never seen anyone like that, because I suppose that is an attribute of one who is completely realized. I suppose that must be what it is. Even when he was old and not well, and he suffered so much, and you could see the suffering etched on his face in '62. It was there. And the pain when he walked. He needed help to get up. But even then, he couldn't hide his grace. Baba could never hide his divinity completely. It was hard. People say, when will Baba manifest and show himself? But it was harder for Baba not to show himself than we can imagine. The hard thing, you see, for us is to imagine how difficult it is for that beauty and that grace and that love to remain somewhat veiled until the right time. And Baba told us, but at least I really couldn't grasp. He said, in '62, he said, do you have any idea? He said, how I want to break my silence? And he said, what my suffering is. And hiding that, keeping it back. I must say though, in '62, it was almost bursting at the seams. He was so full of that divine love that just when he went like this to the people who came by him that last day, that public day, and he could no longer embrace each one. The crowds were so great. And he went like this, and then he took and went like this. And it was, for me sitting there, it was just almost overwhelming, because it was, I just couldn't believe that you could almost see the love coming out of Baba, to these people. Back in, just like that. He just could barely contain himself. That's my feeling. Could barely contain it in himself anymore. He was so really close to bursting with divinity at the end, from where I was sitting. You could look at his hands and tell. It was as though it was seeping out to me. I always thought it was like it's seeping out of his sleeves and his feet. And because if you looked at his hands and his feet, even when he was suffering so, even when he was tired, those hands gave it away. Just one gesture. And to me, again, you could just sow that grace. And now when I try to think of what it is and feel Baba's grace, because it's always there inside the grace. If anyone wants to call on grace, it's always there, that gift. But Baba kind of symbolized it, because if you think of his hands moving so naturally, so fluid, it's really the way all of life is. All of life is grace. And the more we become aware of that and become in tune with that, then the more our lives are grace-filled. So I picture Baba's hands, his feet, when I think about the grace. It was not just a physical grace, it was really, to me, symbolic of what grace is. And every gesture, yeah, there's no doubt. And that is one good word to describe Baba as grace. Because his gift of love is grace. No one is worthy of that. See? That's why it's grace. Grace means gift, undeserved, and without obligation. Any other gift is not grace. And it doesn't matter who we're talking about, no one is worthy of that. You can never be worthy of that. And the only tragic thing in human life, I find, is when people wait until they feel worthy of His grace. When people try to prepare, get ready, before they really open themselves to His grace. When they try to sort of get their lives in a certain place, and then they say, now I'm ready for grace. Or maybe they never say that because they never think they're worthy. I alluded to this the other day when I was talking about a student who went with me to India the first time around, 81 I guess it was. And it's a beautiful thing, but a painful story, because the 9 of the students who went on that trip, I was really just completely at a loss as to why I was doing this, or why Baba was having this trip happen. And all the way over to India I said, now what have I done here? Bringing these people? What is this? Many of them didn't know too much. I tried to tell them. Then I realized the enormity of it. You know? Here I am sitting on the airplane with Elizabeth Patterson's ashes in my lap, going to the tomb of the avatar of the age, and going to see Mera and Erich, these people. And here are these 9 college students sitting around. I said, what have I done? What is going on? And I wondered whether it was the right thing. A little late. You know, but I did. I thought, now what? And we traveled. It took us 50 hours. I won't tell you that story. But it took us 50 hours to get there. They were fine, you know. I was dead. I was gone. I tell you, to be 18 or 19, something else. But anyway, we arrived at Meher. My goal was to go straight to Meher because I had those ashes. And the closer I got to Meher, the more I forgot about them. You know, it just gradually, I didn't think about them anymore. I thought about my dear Auntie Boo, you know, and I felt this is her last journey to India. She loved to travel. She loved India so much, going to Baba. And here I was able to, in a way, go on this last journey and take these ashes. And I was so focused on that and hoping that Baba would let us arrive at his tomb in time so that I could place her ashes next to Baba's feet right away. So that became kind of a constant thought the closer we got. And of course Baba, as usual, all the things come in the way, and the delays and the this and the that, and the Indian customs, you know, and what is you carrying here? You know, the whole thing. So, but never mind. We got through, and 50 hours later we arrived at Meher at about 5 minutes to 7 in the evening. And I knew Baba had planned it, you see, perfectly, because the tomb was to close in 5 minutes with Arti. So without thinking, really, I started rushing up the hill with my package there, you see, rushing up the hill. And about halfway up, it dawned on me, there are these 9 people who have never been here. And I was planning, you see, to get there earlier and explain the tomb and what happens there, and a little more, you see, about the tomb, bowing down and all this, you see, so they'd be a little more prepared for this experience, and I hadn't. So I looked around, and there they all were, you know, like little ducks, you know. They didn't know what to do, you know, except to follow along. I mean, they had gone this far for 50 hours. They weren't going to stop now, you know. And so there they all were, coming along up the hill behind me. And I said, well, all right, I'm giving this to Baba. I can't, this is too late for me to do anything. It's 2 minutes to 7. I'm not going to stop now. So I went on and came to Baba's feet, and Mani actually had left instructions that Elizabeth's ashes were to be left there, on the right-hand side there of Baba's feet that night. So it was just not my idea. I knew that that's what I had to do. So I placed there and paid my respects to Baba, and then I stood on the side. And there they all were at the door, and you know, Nanakir was there. And, welcome home. Brother, sister, Jai Baba. You've all brought Elizabeth here. You know, you must all go in. You know. Just pushing them in the door. You know. And they were standing around, you know, the tomb, Baba's samadhi, looking down, you see, at this thing, looking at this dome. And then we just stood there in silence for a while, just before Arti began. 4 of them, just spontaneously on their own, just as we were standing there, nobody said anything. 4 of them just went down one by one on their knees and, you know, placed their head at Baba's feet. And I thought, well, you know, how much more that means than if I had told them this is what people do, or you shouldn't, you don't need to, or you can do what you... It just came spontaneously. And of course, standing there was such a great privilege to see that. Unbelievable privilege. And they put their head down. Another beautiful part about that moment was that a month later, we had been there a month, and we were getting ready to leave, and I thought about it. I really just let them be on their own, mostly with Baba. And at the end, I had talked to them about their experience and their trip, gotten an impression, and something struck me then. But I sort of put it aside. I said, well, maybe that's just my thinking. Months later, I again thought about it. And do you know, it was those 4 people who really came to give their lives to Baba, of the 9. You see? And now when I think back, I remember that image of that spontaneous heart being drawn to his feet. And I realized, only Baba brings anybody to him. No matter what you hope for or think about the experience they're going to have, only Baba does it. He draws that heart down. All 9 had very deep experiences, and all 9 were touched by being there. But those 4 consider themselves lovers of Meher Baba. One of the other 5, at the end of the trip, I said, Bill, how has this been for you, this trip? And he said, well, you know, he said, I really like what Baba says. I like everything Baba says, really. It makes sense to me. And he said, I love the mandali very much. They're wonderful. He said, but I have a great block about Meher Baba as the avatar. And I said, why? What do you mean? What is the block? You like what Baba says? You love the mandali? What do you mean, block? What does that mean? And he looked at me and he said, the block is, why am I here? If he is who he is, why am I here? He just didn't feel that, he just couldn't believe that he would have that fortune to actually come in contact with not just a master, not just a wonderful saint or something, a great teacher, but the avatar of the age, the Christ. He couldn't absorb that. He felt so unworthy of that. And it touched me so deeply. But it doesn't maybe help to say, but it's good to remind ourselves that there's no way to become worthy of Baba. There's no way. All we can do is accept the gift of His love, His grace, and that makes us worthy to be in His presence.